American Morning for Monday, December 23rd, 2002.
Legend of rock. Sad and sudden news. Founding father of punk rock, Joe Strummer, died yesterday.
Vocalist and songwriter for the British punk band.
At home in Somerset, apparently peacefully, of a heart attack.
Joe Strummer est décédé hier à l'âge de 50 ans avec son groupe mythique créé en Angleterre en 75.
We need Joe Strummer more than ever.
I wouldn't be in a band had I not heard The Clash.
Joe, we're going to have your name on the screen. Would you like anything under your name? Would you like Mescaleros, The Clash, or anything like that?
I'd like you to write punk rock warlord, with warlord being one word.
White riot, I want to riot. White riot, a riot on my own. White riot, I want to riot. White riot, a riot on my own. Black men got a lot of problems, but they don't mind on a break. White people go to school, where they teach you how to be thick. Everybody does just what you're told to. Nobody wants go to jail.
All transmitters to full. All receivers to boost. This is London calling. This is London calling. First of all, welcome to the program. All peoples of the world. This is Joe Strummer at the controls in Bush House in the heart of London. This land is your land. This world is your world. Your world.
A lot of people won't get no supper tonight.
We're going to say the unsayable and play the unplayable. Broadcasting what needs to be cast. If your radio's tuned here, your radio's tuned right. My father was born in India. He only became an English citizen 2 years before I was born. After the war, he came to London and joined the Foreign Office.
He was very, very left-wing, which we thought was quite surprising because he spoke like a very pucker Englishman.
What on earth Ron was doing being a diplomat was completely beyond me. He questioned everything.
My parents weren't musical at all, and I think if I've got any musical tradition, it comes from my mother's side, and she was born on a farm 50 miles south of John O'Groats in a town called Bono Bridge, which is very highland and very wild.
Anna was just this Scottish heather. And the great thing about Joe, he's got those two combinations, you know, of the generosity of Anna and the questioning of Ron.
Fries, Turkish delight.
My father was posted to Turkey, and that's why I was born there.
He was screaming in Turkish when he was about 3, shouting down the stairs some Turkish course that he'd learned.
David was 18 months older than Joe, and they were just like chalk and cheese.
My father was then posted to Cairo for 2 years, and then to Mexico City for 2 years. I went to a Mexican school where they spoke no English, and then to Bonn in West Germany.
See, I got 'em, see the signs, stripped and cleaned before your eyes. So you look fresh and ready to
That's a great Elvis Presley and my favorite Elvis tune because it's got that New Orleans flavor in there and you can feel the heat on the street.
1960, I believe, was the first time I saw him. Johnny Mello, he was called then. He was obsessed with taking my sister's clothes off. He said to me, let's take your sister's clothes off and hide them in this Uncle John's cupboard because no one will ever find them in there. David would just go along with us. Even at that early age, Joe seemed to be the leader of the two of them.
Then I came to England to boarding school. I often think about my parents and how I must have felt about it, because it was like being sent away and seeing them only once a year. It really changed my life because I just realized I had to forget about my parents and deal with this. It was a school where people hung themselves. I quickly realized that you either became a power or you were crushed. I had a gang because I realized you had to fight fire with fire. It was either bully or be bullied. I was one of the principal bullies. And there was no protection from anybody or anything. I was happiest at school because I was in charge of my own world. My brother was very shy. He was a little bit older than me in the year above. They used to say in school he hadn't said a word all term. And I was the opposite. I was a mouthy little git.
Joe kept himself out of trouble, very cleverly. I mean, we'd all be in the shit, wouldn't we?
Most of the time.
Joe always... He knew how to handle people, even the people that were trying to hurt him.
Drink a rum.
Reporting the Scouts as a good way of getting out of school for a weekend, I think, was the reason that we joined.
Banana till the morning come.
We used to spend a lot of time building camps and campfires and all that.
Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana.
And that's Harry Belafonte with a magnificent Deo. Takes me back to the old times.
And all the time that we were at school, I never met his parents. It was as if they didn't exist. He'd go back for holidays.
Come in Africa, you're receiving us. Now we've got Umzike Fani Buthelezi. This is the sort of tune that's like honey to the soul.
Malawi made a big impression on him. He liked the people. I think it just gave him a wider perspective on the world at a very early age.
He would always bring stories back at the beginning of each term, plus a new collection of records.
I can remember hearing the Rolling Stones coming out of this huge wooden radio in the day room. The sound was so different from what we were living in our actual day-to-day reality. It was the sound of another world. that's the moment that I think I decided to only follow music forever. That would be the way to live. I was a lousy student. I was always last in the class. My reports would be really terrible, the worst you can possibly imagine. My relation with my father was even worse. I began to dread seeing him, even the once a year, because the report would arrive in the post and then all hell would break loose. I would say from my upbringing that authority was something to be avoided if possible, attacked. If you could get in and attack it and get away without being burnt, I would say that was high on the list of priorities. In 1968, the whole world was exploding. There was Paris, Vietnam, Grosvenor Square, the counterculture. I think that gave me an edge to put into punk. It was a great year to come of age.
See in a way why Joe was the way he was, but I could never understand what happened to David.
Almost on one day, you walked into his bedroom, it had changed from being a normal boy's bedroom into being black, swastikas and fascism and Mein Kampf, ultra right wing.
David just went into Regent's Park one day and took an overdose of pills. And finally went onto this little island. He decided that things weren't satisfactory.
Joe being the first person to see him and had to identify the body, which must have been a terrifying trauma.
But he didn't talk about it. I think he wanted to kind of keep a lot of stuff at bay. Just keep it at a distance.
I'm the family's unknown boy, golden curls and bendy hair. Pretty girls with faces fair, see the shine in the black sheep boy.
And that was the great Tim Hardin, perhaps a lost genius of music with Black Sheep Boy.
Dead strict environment where you had to really struggle to get out of the game and straight into this seething LSD orgy.
There's only one answer to what you're going to do after school, and that is art school. The last resort of malingerers and bluffers and people who don't want to work.
But the rustler,
Joe, whose name was John, said, oh, my name's Woody.
In the dead hours of night.
I said to him, oh, that's interesting, how'd you get the name Woody? And he said, oh, I just made it up on the spot.
A battle to fight.
I think because of Woody Guthrie. I met him at art college on the first day we lived together. He was instantly charismatic. Everything in the room focused around him. He always had a different way of putting things, a different angle on things.
He was thrown out because he did a collage of used Tampaxes as art, but it was too much for them.
Bang goes society's door. Oh, come on, so secure. Once we find our love and trust, surprising what we say.
I started to follow a musician around called Time and Dog. D-O-G-G. He had this years before Snoop Doggy Dogg. First collecting money for him in the London Underground, like a Mississippi bluesman's apprentice.
Time was the guy who taught and showed Joe that music was the root.
I bought a ukulele because I figured that had to be easier than a guitar, having only 4 strings. When I managed to get some chords together, I was chuffed.
We went down to play at some tube, and I said, Joe, we can't go down and busk the one song that we know. And Joe said, why? Because nobody's ever going to pass twice.
Timon and Joe were walking around in a park in Kilburn, and they came across a guy who I think had probably just come out of mental home. He was a bit strange and he had nowhere to go and he was very disoriented. And they brought him back to live with us and he stayed with us for a while.
I remember the name of the guy. He was called Savoury. And Joe installs this tramp with huge generosity in my bedroom.
When the landlady and landlord found out about us having this black guy, the woman attacked Timon Dog with a stiletto heel.
And they just went berserk. They threw us out, chucked all our gear out the window, and we called the police and said, look, and they said, fuck off, hippies.
I mean, it's bloody impossible to live with, frankly. You never knew where you were, when you were. He lived day for night. He'd go off somewhere to Glastonbury or to the Isle of Wight or somewhere, and he'd turn up a week later, completely unaware that you might have actually expected otherwise.
They'd had their summer love, and by 72-3, it was all over. I always felt it was like coming on the field of a great battle 12 hours after the battle was over. So the casualties were all lying on the field, but the battle was gone.
Come on, come on, come on. None is come that train. Come on, come on, come on. None is come that train. Oh, don't you wanna go?
He did have a very strong boy's own attitude to things. He'd have this kind of spirit of adventure. He'd sleep out under the stars when it was totally unnecessary. And he said, I'm going to be a rock star. So he was right.
That was Bucko White, and it's the syncopation there, all that provided by one man, which I really like.
It was very difficult because I still really loved him. But I knew I had to get away because he was dropping out and I was absolutely determined to carry on with art college.
And I hitched down to Cardiff and she told me to shove off. And so I started to hitch back and the first stop off is Newport. And I had some friends there.
Newport in 1973 was a very working class town. You had the second largest steelworks in Newport. You had the coal mines still active, docks, there were boats coming up as far as the art college. There's nothing PC about Newport in those days. You'd go out and there'd be sort of punch-ups in the streets. It was a tough place. He'd come down from the south of England, the leafy suburbs, and he'd suddenly found himself in this industrial South Wales town, which was completely alien to anything he'd experienced in the past, but he loved it.
He just appeared one day in the entrance hall of the college looking for me. He came with his guitar on his back.
I had the feeling that he was getting away from or going to somewhere. He didn't sort of exactly fit in.
He used to come back to my bedsit and we just used to literally sit up all night while I played my records. And he just looked at me and he said, "Is your mother proud of your eyelashes?"
And that was Israel Kamaka Wiwa Ole from Hawaii.
He used to sign on and he got various jobs.
He was working in a carpet factory and a rubber factory, come back with rubber all over his head.
He took a job in a graveyard.
I wasn't strong enough to dig graves. First morning they told me to dig a grave. When they come back, I'd gone down about 3 inches.
He got the sack when he was found asleep in the grave.
Although I wasn't at the art school, I crashed my way into the art school rock band that became known as the Vultures.
Really make it nasty and homemade, you know what I mean? Do you think that's loud enough?
This is one of the first songs he wrote.
Everybody ready? Take 4.
I drew a cartoon saying how brilliant we were. Conned this poor booker to book us into a big blues club type place in Bristol, but the crowd weren't having it. They pelted us with beer glasses. So after that night, I just realised I had to get back to the capital.
And now we're going to turn over the controls at the tower here to the great originator of all rap and ting, Mr. Uroy. Let it roll.
Instead of fussing and fighting, why not get together and live in one love and one unity, you know?
By this time, they had this really huge squat scene rolling in West 9. 1974, there were rows and rows of buildings all bought up by the council and just left to rot. There were hordes of people in London who couldn't afford to pay rent.
There was an estate agents called the Rough Tough Cream Puff Agency, which put out a newsletter of available houses.
1A Portland Road, West 11, access through the back door, has 11 large rooms but needs enormous attention. There's a basement flat corridor up at number 10 Paris Square, West 11. And at 56 Pembridge Villas, West 11, it's totally corridor up except for the basement window, and we need to sawn through under the cover of convenient bushes.
The only thing to do was to kick in these abandoned buildings and then live in them.
Joe decided to open up a squat and went down there with crowbars and opened up 101 Walton Road. It wasn't just squatting because we were down and out. It was a political act that you can't leave buildings empty when there are people homeless.
Like bathing in the cool water of a fragrant ocean. And that was the sound of Ernest Ranglin and the voice of Baba Mal of Senegal.
I gathered the best people, i.e. people who weren't completely out of their minds, into one squat. And we formed a rock and roll band, the 101ers.
Down the road, I come a jungle partner.
And so a house band got going, and there's about 6 or 7 of us in it.
There were some people running from the regime in Chile. I had a Chilean drummer called Antonio, but when he went on holiday, Richard Snakes Dudansky, he took over after Antonio split.
I think he'd heard me banging around when I had a pair of bongos. He said, look, the drummer's gone, we've got a gig in 2 weeks.
I thought we could mount an attack on a stage and actually get paid.
They were playing for the scene. That was their contribution. Communal entertainment, initially.
When we get short of enough money for food, Joe would go out and busk and come back with money to buy provisions for the whole group.
And he was like part of the community. In fact, Julian was the lead singer.
And I got him in to sing because I thought I was chronic. I really did, right? Because I thought he was better, right? And Mickey Foot, who was working with me back then, right, he said, that other singer you got in, he just sounds just like you. I thought, well, fuck it. So I become the singer again.
You got taken down to the pub for a drink, basically, and then you got told if you'd been fired.
Now, I remember I had to tell Simon the saxophone player, we're not having saxophone anymore, Simon.
We had harsh decisions. We got rid of our mate Mole, the bass player.
I remember Joe saying, well, I think we're going to take Mole for a drink.
It's the process of forming, that's what happens.
I figured out that I'd sacked 48 people once.
And then my sister came in with her Bolivian boyfriend, and he said that the day he saw her, I want to make this girl mine, and so he did.
He took me on a date and he said, you see that pub over there, the Windsor Castle? He said, one day we're gonna play there.
We had the nerve to rent a room above a pub and charge people 10p to get in. That's how we learned to play, by doing it for ourselves, which is like a punk ethos. I mean, you've got to be able to go out there and do it for yourself because no one's going to give it to you. It soon became like a real big mashup. Gypsies would come and rip everybody off.
Handbags would be flying out of the window and somebody would be catching them at the bottom.
We were on stage playing and the police raided the place. And they didn't know who to search with all these like filthy squatters and gypsies and God knows what in this room. Mayhem broke loose. We carried on playing to this crazy thing going on. Yeah, that was fun.
He was never bothered about money, never. Money didn't mean anything to him, but he did like fame.
He decided to change his name to Joe Strummer. And of course it was really difficult for everyone because we all kept saying, hey, Woody. And he'd just blank you, he wouldn't respond. He'd just say, I'm not cool, Woody, you know, my name's Joe.
Well, it was either that or Johnny Caramello. I think Joe Strummer sort of won just by a little nose.
I still can only play all 6 strings or none, and not all the fiddly bits, which is why I called myself Joe Strummer.
Joe was a great inventor of names. He called me Snake Hips Dudansky. I've got no idea where he got it from.
He called me Dick the Shit because my Christian name was Richard, and it was Richard the Third, it was Richard the Turd, it was Dick the Shit.
I realised that we had to start writing our own material, so I wrote Keys to Your Heart, and I was just overjoyed that it came out good.
Well, it's a love song, isn't it? For Aloma.
We'd seen Joe play over at the Acton Hall and the Windsor Castle and quite a few other places.
And the Julie Hewson, big blue policeman, a little black book, wrote it down.
Even members of the Sex Pistols ended up there. They were watching that stuff while I was unaware of them, because it was the only jumping spot in West London on a Thursday.
The band, but Joe was something special, best frontman out there.
The Wanna-Wannas were about to be the top band in London.
They were at a point that they were really making it, like the Roundhouse, but that was not really enough for him, and he just felt he needed a breakthrough.
The Pistols had to come in and blow everything away. They were the stun grenade into the room before the door could go. They came out of nowhere, and they came to support us one night in the Nashville rooms. It was electrifying. It was that difference. They were like a million years ahead.
I think Joe was the only one that saw anything in it.
They destroyed everything that was going on in town that was completely over the second they came out on stage.
I imagine he would have saw us play and then figured, you know, the rockabilly thing weren't working and this was the way to go.
And right at that time, Bernie Rhodes walks into the gig.
We went to see him at the Golden Lion, all of us. Keith went backstage and went, "Can we talk to you?"
I think it was good luck to meet Bernie. The best bit of luck I ever had.
And he drove me down to Shepherd's Bush.
There, in the rear bedroom, was Mick Jones, Paul Simonon, Keith Levine, and me and Bernie walked in, and he introduced me all around, and then we sat on whatever bits of furniture we could find, and we kind of stared at each other. And he said, "I think you should form a group."
And I thought about it. I said, "Could you give me 24 hours?" And he said, "Sure."
Sid and Keith Levine came to the squat. There was meetings in rooms and people mumbling and groaning.
It was very obvious that it was two different kinds of people, really.
He said, "Oh, I just love the way you play guitar." And I said, "Why don't you be in the band then?" And he went, "I will, I'll do it.
That was it. He came out and said, "Right, that's it. The 101ers is finished." And it was a bombshell to the rest of the band.
I mean, I knew it was in the air. You know, it was the 101ers were the problem with the bass player. We got rid of the guitar player. So I knew something was happening. Anyway, the following day I bumped into Bernie Rhodes, who was there.
Let me say something really quickly.
Yeah.
I formed the Sex Pistols, not Malcolm. You know that, don't you?
Yeah.
I found John.
Yeah.
Auditioned him.
Yeah.
Put him in the group. You know, I don't take the credit now. I take it later.
And it was very clear that he was the kind of guy that called the shots.
I'm the philosophy of it. I'm the great engine of it. I am punk. Without me, there's nothing.
I said, "Joe, right, the 101ers is finished, but I'm not going with this guy." And he said, "It's not possible, Snakes. We've got to do it with this guy." And that was it.
You're either for it, punk, or against it. And there's still people today that don't talk to me down in West London for going over to the other side.
To go on to this new bit of his life, he had to stop associating with us, and that was quite hurtful. It was a bit like walking out on a whole lot of beliefs.
The house didn't really last long after that.
The day that I joined the Clash was very much back to square one, year zero. It was a bold move for me to jump into something different. Two guys in the back room of a squat in Shepherd's Bush. But I knew, you could tell by looking at them, you didn't even have to speak to them. Mick and Paul were different. I think we started to rehearse that afternoon. Bernie hired a warehouse off British Rail in Camden Town. Sometimes Bernie would come down and throw us out at night and we'd break back in when he'd gone. We were that keen. It was very much being like in a 24-hour gang, We only had each other.
I knew I wasn't fitting in, and I wanted to be in the band, and it really got me down because I realised, shit, this isn't my band. I left the band. And then it just worked. It just made it that it was going to work.
Paul was just admitting that he couldn't play, and he admitted to me that he had no idea what this instrument was, right? And for a minute I thought, oh God, a whole room of people with no idea how to play anything.
Is Mickey supposed to be producer of this?
Yeah, he is.
Get on with it.
Count it in.
Alright.
Shut your mouth and count it in.
Don't tell me to shut my mouth.
mate.
Go on, do it.
We get really frustrated to have to quickly rush over and do all this. Give us an E.
He just picked it up. He could play as good as me in about 3 weeks.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The one who can really play in the Clash is Mick Jones. More than I'll ever be able to.
What happened to your teeth?
My teeth?
Yeah.
I've never brushed them. I'm a walking advert for brushing your teeth.
That was what was good about punk. If you were ugly, you were in.
Sounds like low shit.
Sounds great to me.
At first, we will have to work more and eat less.
Look, you know, in the next couple of months, this country's going to have it really hard. The next couple of years, maybe. We ain't started yet, right? But I do believe that if you do it in your own way, and you have 2 years of hardship, and I really mean hardship, you might get out of it, all right?
I'd been writing with the 101ers, but with no focus or idea what to write about. And Bernie Rhodes said, write about what affects you. The Clash, for me, right, is a chance to get some great words going. And for Mick, he's really into the music, right? He can hear arrangements. You know, he knows what the bass should do, he knows what the drums should do, he knows what the guitar should do. He can hear it in his head, right? I can't hear that stuff.
All you have to do is look out there to write a song, really. You know what I mean? It's all out there, isn't it? When I'd see his set of words, the tune was sort of there for me anyway, and I could hear the tune coming out of it. There's the roar of the city. It does sound like our music.
I really believe that you've got to live something to sing about it in a convincing way. Like when you hear a great song, someone's torn that piece out of their life.
We couldn't go the full way with Joe. There was something hidden that was a very deep thing.
I ran up to him and I jumped on him. He's with his cool friends and they're all punked up and there's this long-haired hippie girl jumping on him. And so he was kind of different, like a little awkward, and we never were like that. We were always very close. He was just very different, like trouble and like serious, you know. He said, these hippies are all farts, smoking pot and all that, and so I changed. He had encouraged me to be in the Slits. He was showing me how to play the drums. He was supportive, but very soon it became not a good thing between us.
We were almost Stalinist in a way that you had to shed all your friends or everything that you'd known or every way that you'd played before.
So that all might see and agree, the laws were inscribed in a prominent place, to be remembered and obeyed forever.
I mean, do you have a moralistic view of anything you do?
Yeah, I wouldn't steal money off a friend. But I'd steal his girlfriend.
Right.
I think too much, you know, or not enough. I mean, I think all the time. I think thinking is like real fun, you know. I get a lot of fun out of thinking. I mean, I can't see any other point to getting up in the morning, doing everything, and going to bed and getting up again. It's just the thinking that makes it a point to it, you know.
Baseball shirt. I'd rather wear nothing but look like I'm ready to fight. I'm so bored of the USA. I'm so bored of the USA. What can I do?
When the Clash came along and I went to see him, Hi Joe, it's Dick. It's Dick, and this shutter came down. It would have been nice if Joe Strummer had said, hi Dick, how are you? But he didn't. it was almost impossible for him to get out of character and go back. The next chapter had started.
The only way you can really change anything is if you don't repeat your mistakes or other people's mistakes, right? So I can look back at Jagger and all that lot, right? And I can really pick their mistakes out quite clearly. And I'm determined not to repeat those mistakes. I value my existence by what I achieve, you know, by what I create. That's it. Creation is everything, you know.
Yeah. I think it's anything special? No, just blanket covering.
I don't know what I'm after. If I knew what I was after, I probably wouldn't bother to go after it.
Give it a good hammering, John.
And this is Joe Strummer's London Calling on the World Service, coming out of one of these basements we have here in London, throbbing in the summer heat. That was Best Dressed Chicken in the Town by Dr. Alimentado. Well worth checking out him.
To kids like me who didn't really read newspapers, he kind of informed us about events that were going on in the world and made us politically aware, I guess.
One of the things I like this group to do is to try and stop loads of kids joining up to the National Front just because of ignorance.
Big Brother really is here.
It's worse now than ever. Even your Oyster card. You can tell where you were. They can tell where you're going. I haven't got one.
There was a moment where the world stopped. I mean, everything just stopped. 1976, 1977. Suddenly, ideas became more important than guitar solos. And a certain integrity became more important than driving a Rolls Royce into a swimming pool. Rock stars were like Greek gods. You were lucky to be in the room with them.
Oh, look, that's me. That's me.
All that came to an end after the Clash. There was a feeling that if the Clash could do it, you could do it.
I just want to preserve, right, my personal freedom. I just want the right to choose, right? It ain't no use me having the right to choose, right? And not everybody else to have it, right? Everyone's got to have it.
I just thought I joined a band to go to parties and have fun, not to argue about politics night and day. It felt like me versus everyone else. That's why I left, because it's such a grueling onslaught the whole time.
Mick found Topper, and Topper came down, and it just smoked.
It wasn't the sort of music I was into. You know, when punk first started, it was against all the music that I was into. And I thought, well, I'll join, make my name, and then move on to play proper music. Paul said, we've got to cut your hair off. Then Joe said, we've got to dye it. I went home to my wife, right? I left her in the morning with long hair and flares, and I went home with short, spiky blonde hair and zips. And And I called him Woody for some reason. I know the reason, okay? He had little pointed ears at the top, and I thought he looked like Woody Woodpecker. Now, I didn't know that he'd been called Woody in the end before. And I said, "Oi, Woody." And he went, "Don't ever fucking call me that." And I thought, God, he's sensitive.
It's not a bad thing to have the Clash be your first ever rock show. 17 years old, hanging out with my mates, and we got into Trinity College, Dublin. At the back of the stage, they had a picture from the first album, which was a load of bobbies running down the street with truncheons, which was what was going on in London with the race riots. But in Ireland, it looked like Belfast. So it was a very, very, very tense moment as this backdrop was opened up.
We'll have to roll the tanks to the Air Force, roll the Army and the Navy.
And there was a real sense of jeopardy. There was a violence in the air. I was terrified. I was excited. And rock and roll was not entertainment in that moment. It was not a matter of life and death, something much more serious.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So me and my mates stayed up trying to figure out how we could all be in bands that meant as much as the Clash.
Being in the right time at the right place with the right shit, it's just explosive. It was like pirates slashing their way through. We just got completely out of control. We had crews of people stealing cars, hopping rides, just following this thing. I remember once a local TV station came to shoot us in the dressing room before the show. We always used to let people in because, hey, the audience were our friends, you know what I mean? And behind me, it was like one of those jokes where 19 people get out of a baby car. Someone had opened the dressing room window and people were climbing in from the alley. And it's like, I'm not joking, 50 people climbing through this window like a Charlie Chaplin movie.
Hey, ho, let's go! Hey, ho, let's go!
Let's Creek Bop by the Godfathers of Punk Rock. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ramones.
If the kids didn't have money to get home, he'd give them money to get home. If they didn't have money for drinks at the pub, he'd give them money for drinks.
The police would wait till we were driving across the mountains. After a few motels, we'd started to borrow the pillows because it made it easier sitting in a coach seat overnight if you had a pillow. So when they couldn't find any drugs, the police searched the bus and they came up with something like 30 pillows, and then they found hundreds of hotel room keys.
And they said, right, that's theft. And then they threatened to charge every one of us individually with one each and keep us there all night. So Joe said, I'll do the pillows, you take the rap for the keys. And we were locked in the same cell for like 3 nights.
You're going to room 101.
We really got close and we just talked honestly, and I got to speak to the real Joe. Now, every time I'd spoken to him before, there were people watching or people listening, and he wouldn't drop the act. We both said we were scared, because at the time they were making a big thing about the punk thing, and we thought, you know, we might end up in more trouble than we were really in. You know, just got honest with each other. He still had this thing about he was a punk rocker, but he'd been to a public school. They always fucked him up right from the beginning, you know?
I don't care what he's from, he ain't a phony, you know what I mean? And he weren't acting a role, you know? He believed what he was doing.
I think Gabby started going out with Joe, and I just remember this guy walking around flat, our little council flat, with his shoulders up here and his black leather jacket, mumbling. He never said much. They moved to Ladbroke Grove. I'd go there, and then I got to know Joe. He was a great host. He was a brilliant host, making sure everybody had something to drink and chairs to sit on. Coming from a family of diplomats, he'd been taught, you know, to bring out the cocktails for other guests when he was staying with his parents.
Hey, Mick, you want some LSD? Have free. Yeah. You want to really get out there.
I definitely believe, because of punk, that you can have whatever you want. You know, you say, fuck off, this is what I think. But I definitely think that's what formulated me as an artist.
I was the Clash fan. I seen them in '78, they came and played at the Apollo and there was a riot. The Bouncers were big Glasgow thugs who really hated the punks. The Clash had to keep stopping the dig.
I couldn't sing if I felt that people were being brutally mistreated.
I really loved them because they stood up to the Bouncers.
The audience are your friends, and you know better than them. We were one with the audience. Should never feel above anyone.
When punk first started, it didn't seem particularly black friendly. And so when the Clash's first album came out and they got Police and Thieves on it and they got a scene from the Carnival, it sort of made punk accessible to me. I felt like it was a way of saying, yeah, you know, come in, this is for you as well.
White music has always taken from black music. The difference was with people like The Clash is that Strummer and Jones were inspired by people that were living next door. So the effect was a lot more direct.
I remember saying you can't hear the words. But the words are really great, man. Really great, and you can't hear them. Don't you think that's ironic?
Joe had a way with words, the sense of narrative and drama. Joe would have more ideas in a rhyming couplet than some people have on their whole fucking album.
I really connected with Joe's lyrics. Anti-establishment, anti-military, anti-work. Especially the anti-work bit, you know? Because I was working in a factory and I thought, am I going to have to do this for the rest of my life?
This is why we came up with so much idealism, because we figured we was going to need that much to combat a situation like being rich and famous.
All I had was those boats. I had to do something with them, right? I did as much as I could.
No, I used to consider Bernie as a pain in the ass. He always just seemed to be stirring it up. He always wanted trouble.
Joe, I didn't realise, was such a coward, right? Nick, I didn't realise, was such an egomaniac. Paul, I didn't realise, was such a pussy whip guy. And the other one I couldn't stand.
He called me, what was it?
Provincial tosser.
Because I came from Dover.
Bernie got sacked. All of a sudden we were on our own, as if like Daddy had gone away.
And I think this is where we proved ourselves. We stayed in some shithole in Pimlico for 5 months. We were in trouble. We'd lost our management. We just sat there every day and wrote and wrote. And we got that thing down so good, we ran into a studio, we knocked the whole thing off in like 3 weeks and 2 days.
London calling to the faraway towns. Now war is declared and battle come down. London calling to the underworld. Come out of the cupboard, you boys and girls. London calling, now don't look to us. Phony Beatlemania has bitten the dust. London calling, see we ain't got no swing except for the rain and the truncheon thing. The ice age is coming, the sun's zooming in. Meltdown expected, the wheat is going thin. Engines stop running, but I have no fear, 'cause London is drowning. I live by the river.
At the time I was
living right by the Thames. I was following a lot of the doom prophecies. You know, the scientists having the big arguments about who's right and who's wrong. One lot was saying the ice age is coming, and then another lot was saying we're going to collide with the sun, making you feel like I'm just an ant, is it worth living? Then they were going on, well, you better watch out down there on the Thames, you're due for a flood on the spring tide, you're all going to drown. I was cheering myself up by putting all these ridiculous things into one basket. I played it to Mick, and he said he loved the song. He tapped the lyric sheet with his finger. He told me to write the message that we were going to call out around the world. It needed to break out and reach America.
Now get this! London calling, yes, I was there too. And you know what they said? Well, some of it was true. London calling at the top of the dial. And after all this, won't you give me a smile? I never felt so much alike.
So the Sex Pistols landed here in 1869. We're not particularly talented, we try on.
What is it in terms of the energy? I mean, you put out more energy.
We give it all we got, that's all. It's as simple as that. Everybody's used to paying $8 and getting half measures and like going home satisfied. Well, in England they gave up being satisfied 3 years ago. You gotta give it all you got or forget it.
He knew the culture of America. He knew the literature. He knew the music of it, backwards and forwards. And so he hit it off immediately. Here was this unlikely meeting of guys that grew up thousands of miles apart, but the same things moved us. He was passionate. He sang every word like he meant it. He sang about things that were deep down in his soul. He sang about injustices, and he sang about everything as if it was urgent.
I don't know if his politics could be separate from his art. They're kind of a spiritual politics. He didn't ask you to just question authority. He asked you to really explore the very nature of authority. What does it mean to be free?
I suppose the initial effect the Clash had on me was the proper effect. You know, you were experiencing a sincerity, not only in the lyrics, but in the music as well. You know, there was a truth in the attack.
They sort of pretended that they hated America, but Joe loved cowboy stuff and big cars and big pizzas, and when you went to the bar, a single was a double.
Honey, I forgot to duck.
So there was a lot of things that they liked about America.
I came out of the Vietnam War, and I was very much into people's liberation struggles. In '76, I got very involved with the Sandinistas.
It was a sort of teenage revolution where the people actually, for once, took control of their own country for the first time.
I was given, as a gift, these fighting scarves that they used in Esteli. Esteli's a small town in Nicaragua, so that the Somoza troops wouldn't know who they were. Then I gave these to Joe and Mick.
They decided to call the record Sandinista to redress the lack of information that was in the papers.
I never knew who the Sandinistas were or where Nicaragua was. The lyrics of Joe Strummer were like an atlas. They opened up the world to me and to other people who came from a kind of blank suburbia.
It's up to you not to heed the call of I don't wanna die. It's up to you not to heed the call of I don't wanna kill.
As soon as the people got hold of the idea that, all right, it's punk, we get it. we got it. And then when we started to play other things, you get a lot of abuse, especially in Britain.
I mean, my favorite Clash record is Sandinista, and the whole concept of that record of people standing up for their brothers and sisters and not taking any shit. There's like the same ethos of punk rock. But they couldn't have been my favorite band of all time if every record hadn't grown and hadn't gotten better and hadn't changed. And it's the biggest inspiration for me with our band, with the Chili Peppers. I mean, because there's no point in carrying on if you don't have something new to say.
Sandinista, the triple, for the price of one. We wanted it released for a low price, because we felt that records were generally overpriced. And that's when the record company Freak, they were quite happy to bury that one, I think. You learn a lot about life, getting shafted royally. And anyway, after Sandinista, I realized that I wanted Bernie back. I still think Bernie's a creative individual, and I was missing his inputs.
It was a question of either Joe was going to leave or Bernie came back. So Bernie came back.
With a vengeance.
The Clash was a rusty old wreck, and I had to grab it and do it up and put my engine in it, my updated engine.
Yeah. Would you like to interview our manager while he's here?
Catch him while he's hot.
Bernie.
Bernie.
Oh, leave him. Let him see.
Sorry, that's Bernie Rose.
Sorry about that. Come back.
He invented punk. It's obviously too much for him.
The Clash became like a family. It was like warring brothers. I think the others kind of looked up to Joe. Joe was like the big brother. He was a bit older, I think that made a difference, and he was probably the most forceful.
Then we found our greatest success in commercial terms.
The Clash invade America, next Off the Record.
People still hate us in England for making it in America. Somebody had to break out and prove that this thing was a global thing. It wasn't just a neighborhood thing.
Only half the people could get in, and they started rioting in Ozone Square. And it was right across the States, the first time since Frank Sinatra that they had to close off Times Square.
It's a madhouse there. It's crazy in there. The Bond's manager, Joel Heller, denied his club had done anything wrong.
Well, did you have... no one... I cannot say that we overbooked.
All over New York, you could hear our stuff coming out. There was a black mix of Mag 7. That was coming out of every ghetto blaster in the city every hour. That summer, that moment, we had New York.
There was a romance that the Clash had with New York at that period in time. I remember bumping into a guy called Jack Checker, who was a cab driver, and he told me that they weren't like other rock stars who came to New York. Their limousine was Jack Checker's cab.
Oh, he just wanted to see the city. He wanted to see Harlem. He wanted to see Brooklyn. He just wanted to see the people and interact with the people.
Does this man deserve to be in jail?
I mean, they took New York, and all the artists wanted to see them and wanted to check them out.
The Clash was a revelation. It took us back to the first excitement of hearing rock and roll for the first time.
And all that sound about Raging Bull.
Interestingly enough, in Raging Bull, the music that is there is music from the 40s and 50s and opera. But the place I went for the source, for creativity, came from the Clash, really.
I did see the Clash at Bonds, and Grandmaster Flash opened for them, and they were practically booed off the stage.
It was crazy, like 3,000 people, like everybody say, hold, it's like, fuck you. Say, yeah, get the fuck out of here.
When the Clash came out, Joe reprimanded the whole place, and said, you gotta give him a chance, you gotta listen, like, don't do that. And the whole crowd was like, oh shit, Strummer just did a number on us. Even when I'm vomiting on a carpet in the airport, it's him who's standing up for me, having a go at the journalist, saying he's ill, leave him alone.
Shut up, will you, stupid cunt.
Oh, thanks very much about that.
Yeah, that's what you deserve with that sort of crap. What do you think we are? Do you think this is 1976 and you're talking to the Sex Pistols? Piss off or I'll fucking piss all over you. If he feels like throwing up, it's because his stomach hurts. I don't need your jokes to fucking contend with.
If you haven't got something serious to say, piss off.
Well, it's serious.
Well, you tell me. How about life and death? Never mind who pukes on stinking carpets. There were parts of his character that I didn't like. I had my girlfriend on the road with me. I had a big argument with her somewhere and said, right, well, you're not sleeping in my room. I woke up the next morning and she'd spent the night with Joe, you know, and that kind of really hurt. I felt really betrayed, and he did it with me, he did it with other people as well, you know. We'd lost that unity. I was already starting to disappear at my own arse. Joe was having doubts. I think he was already becoming embarrassed by the fact we were so successful. And Mick wouldn't travel on the bus unless he had a spliff.
Everybody's got their weaknesses, you know.
I'm having a nervous breakdown.
We got fed up with each other. We've been living in each other's pockets for year upon year. We never had a holiday. Groups now have a holiday. They go away, they get their heads together. We never had any of that. We just continually work.
And Mick thought if he didn't want to play White Riot, none of us could.
I made a comment which was probably out of order, and I probably shouldn't have said it, but I did, and that's what sparked the whole thing up. And it was directly related to his presence on the stage.
You know, you've got no respect for the stage. And I said, don't fucking tell me about the stage. And then he threw his vodka and orange in my face.
You're a total wreck.
So I hit him as hard as I could in the center of the forehead.
It was one fuck of a punch, and it drew blood, you know. That's what people call musical differences, ain't it? Mick didn't like White Riot. But Joe looked as shocked as Mick did. Fuck me, what have I done here, you know?
I'm having a nervous breakdown.
Well, I'm no boxer, but I guess that was a triple hook combination with a double uppercut. Eddie Cochran there, nervous breakdown.
And it was over the next thing, and I was laughing my head off.
Suddenly you're on Saturday Night Live, you get on Johnny Carson, you're on talk shows. We weren't prepared, funnily enough, after all the years of struggle, to actually be there. Everybody began to get big-headed.
It was just falling apart. Never at any one time were the four of us in the studio at the same time. I turned up at Electric Ladyland Studios and no one was there. I've got this idea on the piano. If I put the drums down, I can put the piano over the top, and when the others come in, I can say, this is my idea. So I put the drums down, put the piano down, and still no one was there. So I picked up the bass and put the bass down quickly and added the percussion. And by the time they came, I said, listen, I've got this idea. And I played it to them, and it was virtually completed. It was Joe actually said, well, that's brilliant.
Bernie came in and he said, why does everything have to be a raga? And we went, what? He said, everything's going on for 6 minutes. How are we going to get this stuff on a record? And then he left, and we started to laugh about the raga. I went back to the Iroquois Hotel on 44th, and it was already daylight again. I had a typewriter in the room, and I went over to the typewriter and I typed, now the king told the boogeyman, you have to let that raga drop. I was tired out of my mind, and that paper sticking out of the typewriter was irresistible. I just sat down and I did the whole lyric to Rock the Casbah. There's no tenderness or humanity in fanaticism. That's what I was trying to say in Rock the Casbah.
Mick and Joe's relationship had become really difficult. You know, we used to drive around there and he used to post lyrics through the letterbox. He didn't want to see him, he didn't want to write with him.
I got worried at that point that Mick would lead us into disaster through his complete idealism and refusal to compromise in order to operate in the real world.
You know, Mick's an emotional guy, wears his heart on his sleeve, and quite often was the fall guy for things that Joe was actually responsible for. And Mick took a lot of undue flack, but that was Joe doing his Machiavellian manoeuvring number so that he wasn't the bad guy.
But we're not very good at making life easy for ourselves. We never have been. We keep going because, like, we are the real McCoy. We're not going to just fold up and in a few weeks you wonder what all that was about. We're going to be here and continue and get harder and rougher than tough. Dreader than dread, you know. It was the eve of a tour. The tickets in the UK were not selling that well. So Bernie Rhodes said, look, you've got to disappear. I said, well, Bernie, if you really think I should disappear, I will. Where do you want me to disappear to? And he said, well, I don't know. Go to Austin, Texas. You know that fellow there, Joe Ely, the country singer. I said, okay, Bernie, I'll be seeing you. I took the boat train to Paris instead, and I thought it'd be a good joke if I never phoned Bernie at all. He was going to be thinking he was going to be acting, you know, oh, where's Joe gone? And really he was going, where has he gone? And I ran the Paris Marathon too. And eventually they hired a private detective to find me.
What is he up to, and what news is there of his whereabouts? Who can answer that? Cosmo?
We don't know where he is, and we can't find him. And if you're listening, Joe, I said this before, please get in touch. We need to talk to you.
So in no way is this any kind of publicity stunt?
None whatsoever, I'll tell you.
He was just proving, without me, this band can't go on. And when he came back, it was either me or Topper. I can't deny that I wasn't firing on all cylinders. When you use drugs, you don't care anymore. I was self-seeking, I was dishonest, I was... You know, I didn't really give a fuck about anyone.
They have to undo my boots for me because I can't undo them. Oh, right. Yeah, hurry up. I gotta go sunbathing. You go sunbathing.
Bye, Topper. Down the railway track.
There wasn't a lot of choice, really. You can't have a band where the drummer is so out of it he can hardly play sometimes, and he's always late. I burst into tears, right? Mick was crying. Then Joe kind of softened. He said, listen, it's not the end. If you pull yourself together, we'll say you've been sacked for, you've got nervous exhaustion, and if you get yourself together by the time we come back, you got the gig. I tried to stop, and about a week after they started the American tour, I think Joe got drunk and he said, we had to get rid of Topper because he was a heroin addict. And overnight, you know what I mean, I was Topper from the Clash resting through nervous exhaustion to being sacked for being a junkie. And that's when I started injecting.
While I was playing hooky, everybody had a row, and Topper just decided that he obviously didn't think I was ever coming back, and he decided to cut out. You know, we're playing with a guy called Terry Chimes, who played on our first album, and maybe we'll stick with him.
I was living in a squat in Fulham with no windows, sleeping with my dog under the carpet. I'm seeing my song on a video with some other bloke playing in it.
I don't think we played a good gig after Topper was fired. Rock the Casbah cracked the top 5 in America. We want to be #1 in every country in the world. Seriously, we do.
It made me wake up to a lot of things that are happening in the world, man.
Kick-ass band.
Revolutions, nuclear arms race, individual rights.
But if that's going to destroy us, then we're not so sure we want it.
What do you want to be doing when you're 40 years old? Do you want to stay into this and continue to play?
I want some dignity left. Yeah.
They're not punk rock now. What are they now? They're just what the Stones are.
Obviously, life's full of sick jokes, and you could have seen that one coming, I guess. But it's still of a shock when it actually happens. You know, we turned into a load of pop stars. I couldn't believe that we turned into the people we were trying to destroy. I'd rather go back to busking, be a nobody, than carry on like that.
When the Clash got really, really huge, it must have on some level, you know, been frightening, you know. I mean, it must have scared them on some level, and maybe they weren't ready for it then. Just afraid that that degree of success or money would taint their purity, their ability to be honest.
What is the question?
I'm asking you about the kind of responsibility that you feel that you've got towards the fans as the public figures that you are.
I just don't feel strong enough to carry anything at the moment, let alone anything like that.
Are you discouraged with rock and roll in general, though?
It's no worse than any other prostitution business.
What we got for you tonight is, we ain't got no baseball tonight. We ain't got no football, they're on strike. But what we have got for you
singing the songs while it got bigger and bigger towards the end, for some reason I began to feel worse and worse. It's something to do with what those songs are saying. It's all right when we were part of the audience, part of a movement. Once it became thousands of miles removed from that, I began to freak out.
Mick was probably comfortable with success. Joe was uneasy with it, but he didn't know why he was unhappy, and he was just a struggle inside him that couldn't ever be resolved. You know, he couldn't be happy because he wanted the band to be successful, but when it was successful, he wasn't comfortable, so there was nowhere to go.
The thing that the Clash don't understand, and the thing that a lot of these bands don't understand, is that you can't take life so goddamn seriously, honey.
You make, you buy, you die. That's the motto of America. You get born to buy it. And if there's anything going to be in the future, it's got to be from all parts of everything, not just one white way down the middle of the road. I need some hostility here, you know. Yeah, I need some feeling of some sort. Hey, we're all alive at the same time at once, you know. Stay or should I stay? Stay or should I go? If I go there we'll be trouble. And if I stay there we'll be trouble. So you got to let me know.
7 years ago, we decided that we were going to be bigger than anybody else, but still keep our message.
Who am I supposed to be? Take the side to remember which prospects I've been.
We have fallen into every pitfall that you could possibly fall into as a group, starting from nothing and becoming something. Probably invented a few new ones along the way. The success goes to your head pitfall, the ego trip pitfall. So you think you're geniuses, you become drug addicts, you make overindulgent records, you overdub the sound of ants biting through a wooden beam. All these things, we've gone through each and every damn one of them, and that's why we come out a depleted force.
Should I stay or should I?
Mick was pretty hard work to work with. He was in his prima donna phase. Bernie turned around to me and said, look, why don't we sling this guy out? And I figured it was a good idea because I don't like being bummed out. You know, when you go to work in a good mood and there's some guy always bumming out. We weren't about to make any music like that, so I thought, fuck it, why not?
I think it was Joe who managed to muster up the courage to say that he didn't want to play with me anymore. And when somebody says that to you, you know that I just packed my guitar up and just, well, hey, you know, okay, bye, and that was it. And I walked. And Bernie come running out after me with a check in his hand, you know, like a gold watch or something, you know, which added insult to the injury. But I took it anyway. It was right at the time, the carnival. It was awful, you know, I walk around the carnival and then you might see someone and you're like trying to... I did everything. I grew a beard. I dyed my hair, you know, blonde for about 2 days. It was a complete traumatic shock. But then that's character building, you know, when those things happen to you.
I hadn't understood that the manager suddenly wanted to become an artist. Bernie conned me to get rid of Mick, to lay the way open for him to step in. Stupidly, I allowed that to happen. It's my fault about the end, definitely.
So he kind of thought, yeah, well, maybe Mick was the problem, like he thought Chopper was the problem, you know. He didn't maybe at that point think we're all the problem.
I mean, he was a coward too. You know, there you go, I gotta say it. I mean, Joe, you know, he was a coward and didn't like confrontation.
What pisses me off about The Clash is that this extraordinary band should still be here.
We had to restructure our group to get rocking again.
Pete Howard, the drummer, and Vince White guitar, and up top, Nick Sheppard guitar.
Pete Howard and Vince and Nick Sheppard, they all felt really intimidated, which I can't blame them because they were entering the scene, it was already so big.
How do you feel about the band at this point in time?
Great. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
Everything's blando, 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 you know. Let's have a revolt from the bottom up.
Drugs are over from this minute now. Anybody who takes a drug is a hippie, and hippies can shove off.
Accountants and lawyers are writing the songs. Attorneys are playing the lead guitar solos.
Bono Rhodes wanted to really take over big time, and he wanted to be the producer, and I let that happen. Everything was wrong. There was no vibe. It was all Bernard's ego. Eventually, I snapped.
Strummer, he was a bloke to do the job. He was temporary. He wasn't permanent.
And that was the end of it.
Karina, Karina, yeah, we've been so long.
They used to ask me, so you think you schmucks can change the world, they'd say to us. They said it so often that you began to believe them, which is fatal. Trust thyself.
Baby, please come home.
Joe came into Granada in 1984. He was looking for the Federico Garcia Lorca things. Quickly, the gossip spread in the city that this guy who is like a hippie, he's so dirty, he seems to be Joe Strummer. So I went to the bar and said, hey, are you Joe Strummer? He told me in Spanish, sí, hombre, ¿qué quieres beber? So, what do you want to drink? He told me that he felt so frustrated, so alone, so lonely. He was unsatisfied with what he was doing, and while watching the Alhambra, say, my brother should be here. If he knew Granada before, he probably wouldn't commit suicide. And suddenly he told me how wonderful it is to be alive.
That's Bob Dylan with Karina Karina and his wild scratching posse of hip-hop artists.
Recorded live at the Village Vanguard down in Old Manhattan.
Even though Joe was a natural preacher, and even though he was a really righteous preacher, the very fact that he became a preacher in some ways was maybe a betrayal of his own best instinct. And I always sort of felt like he spent those kind of wilderness years almost doing penance.
You know, I had to really disassemble myself and examine all the pieces and put myself back together. I really felt completely destroyed by that experience. And also, my father had died while we were on the last tour. And when I came home, my mother started to sicken, and then she died after the end of that year. You know, I lost my parents, my group. You want to think about things, you know, you become a different person. No more was I an adolescent. I'm a London parent. I've got kids now.
Joe had to really exorcise the ghost of the Clash. It was a journey that he had to take through where he'd been, what he'd achieved, and his part in it all exploding.
It's ironic that, you know, after Mick was cast out from the Clash, he was really the first one to break big with Video Dynamite. And Joe seemed to be spending his time doing a little bit of acting work and the odd soundtrack.
The desert's beautiful at night. Beautiful but lonely. Some people don't believe in God.
That was my first week on the picture, you know, and you have to, gun twirling takes about a month.
I was 18 when I made Straight to Hell with Joe. I was broke, I was busted, I was in love with a total loser, and I had no place to go in London. And I called Joe, and him and his wife and his children took me in like I was, you know, their family.
It's great having kids because that brings you back down to earth. You do find yourself shouting, turn the bloody music down, yeah, turn that rabble. I guess it's some sort of learning thing that we've got to go through. Us rebels thought that we could somehow escape, you know, but it's all in us somewhere, isn't it? We become our parents slowly but surely.
I saw him withdraw. He would just completely cut off and go to his cabin or his cell or his whatever he created that was very private, and he'd retreat to that and he'd do his thing. So I suppose in the conventional term, he wasn't 100% brilliant father. When he was on, he was fantastic, and when he was off, he was just not available.
He really loved those girls. There were a lot of uncertainties with Joe, but that was one thing that was very clear.
You were lead singer of The Clash for many years, and
Many.
now you're hanging around. Are you looking to form another band?
No, I'm kind of just doing a bit of music for film, but I'm not really looking at that as something to do long term. I'm more like trying to get my bearings. You know, it takes a while to recover from 10 years on the road with one group. You know, I can't seem to snap into it that quickly.
I got a phone call from him, like, you know, Xander, we're up here in San Francisco, you know, at Russian Hill Studio, and I want you to come up and bring a Spanish guitar. You know, it was like, that was the message. That was my call to arms to be a part of that Walker soundtrack.
I think Walker was one of the finest things that he ever did. He was really proud of that.
No one's ever heard it, but never mind.
I am actually in it as an extra. I grew a beard and grew my hair really long. I ran about wearing rags.
Whenever he tried something new, people weren't really prepared to listen with new ears, because what people wanted was Joe Strummer and they wanted The Clash. And that spoilt a lot of the work that he did.
One day I was standing on Portobello Road and I thought, you know, it's time to cut down on my drinking. And I walked home and the phone rang, and it was the Pose going, hey, you've got to come on tour. So I did a US tour, depping for the rhythm guitarist in the Pose.
Okay, we're going to go out and get vibed up.
I think the Pose gave Joe a good appetite to start playing live again himself, you know.
I put together a nice little group for this permanent record film. I called it the Latino Rockabilly War.
I wrote the music and then I went out for 3 nights looking in all the little clubs and bars and little underground scenes that are happening in Los Angeles. I just picked the musicians from watching them. I already knew Xander because he worked on Walker, but I picked the rest up from jazz clubs and bohemian dives. You know?
In Trash City, that's Party Avenue. I got a girl from Kalamazoo. In Trash City on the transit line. I put you on hold, but you're looking fine.
He was looking for a drummer in his band, and he said, I've got the guy. I said, who? He goes, Ramon Bajaranda. I said, is he good? He goes, I don't know, but his name's Ramon Bajaranda, man. He's got to be good. We got to hire him. Of course, he was not in the band, unfortunately.
He hired my former drummer, Jack Irons, and he's a pretty phenomenal beat keeper. I thought that was pretty amazing because at the time Jack was in a mental institution, and so Joe was like, oh, that's okay, we'll get him a ride to and fro every day, and he'll come into the studio and he'll have a job and we'll make this record.
I think if your projects are consistently failing, if they weren't selling records or people weren't really listening, I think ultimately that wears you down.
I'm still signed to Epic from the Clash days.
Mm-hmm. And you have no great desire to do a record for him?
For Epic?
Yeah.
Well, I expect sometime in the last 4 years someone would ring me up and head me, but nobody ever did.
He was quite depressed. He was not happy. I mean, the whole process of Earthquake Weather, in retrospect, I see it as he had masterminded his own death at Epic, Just fucking release me once and for all. I mean, I'm going to take a $500,000 budget and make a $500,000 art record. And they hated it.
I had the head of the label and a bunch of the sort of brass from Epic assembled at Baby O Studios in Hollywood to hear the record. I can't find him anywhere, and he's not at the studio. And I go to the house, and I see in the driveway there's a yellow piece of legal paper nailed to the door. Dear Jerry, : don't be mad, dash. I wish I still had this. I've gone to the desert. We'll be back on, : Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then he circled Thursday. Joe couldn't just write I'll be back Thursday. He probably didn't even know until he saw all the days of the week written out in his own hand. Thursday. And he came back Thursday, and it was too late. Everyone had gone back to New York, and he made that record a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think. He didn't have his confidence back yet.
The guy fucking intended on shooting himself in the foot, sabotaging his career, and possibly any kind of relationships that he had that he didn't want to be in. He needed to make some serious changes in order to be happy.
He had to find a place in himself where he was happy with just being Joe and letting go.
It was part of the reason why I shut down shop after earthquake weather, because I realised I was contracted to these people on a never-ending contract. So I was kind of fucked, and I decided to bore them out. For the next 8 years, I figured out how to get out of the contract.
I guess it was kind of a dark period for him in some ways when we became friends. You know, he had a lot of frustrations about his life in general. I'm sure other people have brought up, the Strummer's law of no input, no output, because he was always interested in taking things in. That period maybe was very important for him and fertile, but I think maybe a little painful at times.
And I cornered him in the kitchen. And I said to him, Joe, do you think we'll ever work together again? And it's one of the most brilliant things he ever said to me. He said, don't be stupid, man. I was like, and it was like one of those ambiguous, like, Joe-isms. It's like, don't be stupid, man, of course. Or don't be stupid, man, move on, it's over.
Jim asked me to be in his film Mystery Train. And he said that Strummer was going to play one of the parts. I was as nervous to work with him than if he told me I was going to work with Marlon Brando or De Niro or somebody, that it was Strummer. I was like, all right, just calm down. It's okay. You can do this.
I was hoping that maturity would arrive. I'm still waiting at the station for it. I found you can't just walk in there and expect to get a result.
Sorry.
A bit like you couldn't really walk into a studio if you never thought about music and put down a good album.
Used to go from high to down easily. He was really emotional.
Good morning, Saudi Arabia. Kicking off Desert Shield Network, FM 107. And we started off rocking the Casbah.
I saw him crying because he saw in the news a bomb, an American bomb, prepared to be thrown in Iraq, was reaching Rock the Casbah. He was crying. He told me, hey man, I never could think that a song of mine could be reaching as a death symbol in a fucking American bomb.
I used to call him Chief Thundercloud, because he was in a very dark space. I did this film called When Pigs Fly, and I benefited because he was so anxious to make music.
Way down in a working town, where the boys you might find some happy and some sad, but some drunk all around. If the breeze is blowing in from home, the door is shaking in the wind.
Now that's when the boys will sing the rose of Erin.
He hadn't been in the studio for a very long time. And he kind of went nuts, and he gave me 9 hours of music in 4 days.
Oh no! Bollocks. You always, every time you get something happening, you always go over it by later in the fury of it. Could you play me the rest of it? You haven't run back, have you? Could you go right to the end to see what's left after that stupid fool clapped on it? Bloody hell! What a pillock!
Imagine that you're a rock and roller, and say you were in a big band like I was and what have you, and time goes by, and then you meet a 17-year-old guy. He's never heard of The Clash, and that's the moment that my feet touch the ground again. I've got ideas for the new world. I can't go back. It's be like a living museum. No, I just want to get out there and do something new, and then you get your own energy from the newness of it. I think it says in the Bible, there's a time to dance to techno and a time not to.
We've got new, fresh sounds every week. You can't even keep up with it. Have you tried keeping up with, like, techno, hardcore, trance, intellecno? It's a hotbed of creativity, and that's a fact. Standing in a kitchen listening to rave music, I couldn't understand it. I had to go to a rave to understand it. And after about 4 hours, we were supposed to go into a trance. In fact, I was going into a trance. And I thought, let's just say we were in a forest and there was nothing to do but these big empty logs. Like, say we were pygmies or something. We'd end up, what we'd be doing by about lunchtime, we'd be standing around a log with big sticks and we'd be going, dum, 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 dum. There's an anti-criminal justice act in England which is banning parties, raves, repetitive beats, more than 10 people in the field. And it's only made the underground stronger because you have to band together to fight the common thing. It was a case of that as well with punk.
You can see the hippie thing about it, you know what I mean? Punks were hippies with zips.
People began to kick hippies around, but quite frankly, I am a hippie. I want to be a hippie, you know? Punks and hippies are now fighting together here in England. It's the same thing they want. In fact, you can't tell them apart. And they're coming together in some new, strange style.
The first original Strummer campfire probably started at Glastonbury. He loved the kind of community aspect and the techno thing he suddenly got. You know, once it was there, once it was instilled in his brain, he instantly understood it and became a champion for it.
There's no better place to be on this whole island than right here, right now. I think this is some sort of gene memory. This is my theory. It's in our blood over here to have these kind of big meets. I bet you if we were standing here like maybe 2,000 years ago or whatever, you know, there'd be something like this going on.
But Joe was looking around the world for different inspiration.
This is Andres Landero, the king.
Cumbia music, African music.
Jason Mail brought this lovely music to us. We are riding on it. We love it. We play it all the time.
Joe was marrying Luce, and I just felt really happy for him because he seemed very happy. It helped to ground him and to help focus him and give him a base to grow from and to start his new music and give him a bit more confidence in himself. And I think Joe really appreciated being Joe Strummer and not being the ex-Clash member.
Joe was a very spiritual person. He always had an interest in kind of American Indians, the Incas, Mexicans. But he did love the image and the symbolism attached to a campfire. It was very, very important to him. He saw it as a great opportunity to express himself, but in a really quiet way. I think Joe was fed up with shouting. And there's nothing better than people wandering through and sitting down, because at a campfire itself is a very comforting thing. You sit there, you get warm, and you talk.
Last train to Nashville, girl, yeah, you got on board. You packed up your medicine and you left without a word.
He would go off for hours on end and come back with people from all walks of life, none of whom we knew. He just enjoyed talking to people. He enjoyed listening. He used to learn so much.
You don't dance to techno anymore.
He's always thinking of other people all the time, about extra tents, extra sleeping bags for everyone.
It was an extension of the whole ethos of Glastonbury. For him, it was a form of alternative living with your friends.
In Rastafari, we say more fire, and it's not supposed to be a violent thing. It's about purging and cleansing and rebirth and rising phoenix-like out of the ashes. So maybe that's what he was tuned into.
He had a lot to teach about life in general and like the sort of the real world, not the perfect world.
Well, Joe's campfire was utopian. It was re-exploring the rules, re-exploring how you can make music, and it's like going back to the Druids. Yet the experience was pushing the envelope, trying to find something new.
Well, we hadn't seen each other for nearly 25 years, and Joe bumped into my daughter, and he gave her a note, and it just said, "Nothing's changed. We're all old hippies at heart. Come and have a campfire."
The campfires opened up the idea to Joe that he could form another band. It didn't have to be Clash-type music, that it could be an amalgamation of everything that he listened to. It gave him the confidence to think, hey, maybe I can find like-minded people to play with me.
Joe challenged you and he provoked you. In fact, the last time I saw Joe, I had an argument with him because he was trying to tell me not to stop smoking.
If you took cigarettes away from the 20th century, we wouldn't have any of the writers you go on about or anybody worships. This would not exist, and I want this acknowledged. And in fact, I think non-smokers should be barred from buying any product that a smoker created.
We spent a long time trying to get Joe back on the road. We're talking about 2 years here. I mean, it started off, we were trying to get him to reform the Clash, but he was really adamant that he would not go back out on the road again.
If that was no toe tapper or no body shaker, boy, you need to see the Undertaker. That was Andres Landero, El Rey del Accordion. I had my daughter on my shoulders. I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Ooh, Dad, there's a naked man dancing on the stage." So I said, "Let me see." So I threw her on the ground and stood on her recumbent body so I could see. And this is my first glimpse of Anthony again. And then I met him after that performance.
I was kind of drunkenly saying to him, "Come on, man, you're fucking Joe Strummer. Get up off your ass and make a fucking record. You know, we need you." I just didn't expect him to turn around and say, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it with you."
If you leave it too long, there's a sort of magic moment when it's too late to come back. And I think I just got in before the door closed.
Please welcome Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros.
He hadn't been on the road for a long, long time. He put a few pounds on. You could see he was knackered after 3 tunes because he hadn't paced himself. He was giving it all, you know what I mean? And he was just sweating, but nobody cared. It was Joe.
We got to fight for your crowd. Excuse me, girls. I'm trying to promote a rock and roll show tonight. Rock and roll. When you hustle, you got to have a hard shell. Like Captain Beefheart said, one cold vibe won't stop this here boogie. I'll leave you with the Flyer in case you fancy going.
Okay.
It's the hippest place in town tonight. Great. We're building.
When I got back on the road, my expectations were zero, zilch, because I don't like to be disappointed, so I keep my expectations at a bare minimum.
It was constantly about reinvention.
There was a power cut, I got silly madness. Conversation died, most of us hold up there. When the darkness lay.
Yeah, he loved it. He loved it. He absolutely loved it. He loved the whole deal, just as a beginning chapter of a new period in his life.
Sorted out the east shore. Well, left to shout out, we all need a little more.
Songs don't tend to come to you, I think, if there's no outlet for them. Because I couldn't get any records out, songs would occasionally come, but I knew that as soon as we had a contract, the floodgates would open. I got reams of lyrics, carrier bags full of twisted napkins with insane things written on them. And you get a great idea for a lyric, just push people out of the way, throw yourself on the floor and write it down, because it only makes sense in the moment.
He would always just walk around the studio and he had an A4 sheet of paper and a pen, and he'd just write reams and reams of lyrics. And it went on for a few hours, and then about midnight or whatever, he went, "Okay, I've got a song." And he'd just written a song about his walk from Wilson to Cricklewood. And during that time, I was fiddling around with this little tune. I wasn't thinking for a second that Joe was going to go, "Yeah, that's good." I was just messing around. There was Joe Strummer and there was John Graham Mellor. He talks about his children in that song.
Go on, we'll do a skip, right?
1, 2, 3, action!
Maybe that night I wrote a song with John Mellor.
Pinching myself sometimes. We actually got a record, you're traveling, you're going around, you're in countries, you're talking to people, you're playing shows. It's such a change from 10 years in the wilderness. Yeah, it feels great. I'm having Christmas every day.
Now here's Joe Strummer!
You know, when the Clash were on tour and we lost the beat, Chef would be like at the side of the stage going, "Don't forget, pump your loins, children." You know, that was like his motto or something.
What the hell is this? Whenever we hung out, all of us brought sunglasses when Joe called saying, "We're going out," you know, because you knew you'd be up at dawn somewhere with Joe.
You would get a message like, "I'm coming into town," and you would take your vitamins and get your rest.
And if Joe could find a piano, he would play Junko Partner. Like it's, 5 o'clock in the morning and we're all singing to Junko Partner in some ground floor apartment in the East Village.
Slowly but surely my drug addiction became much more severe. He's seen that movie. He knows how that movie ends. So there's only one thing to do, and that's cut that guy loose.
I was staying in Portsmouth at the time. I hadn't seen Joe for a few years, and I saw him in the bar, and he kind of looks like this, going, "Have you got an instrument with you?"
I just said to him, "Where's your violin?" He said, "In the car." I said, "Go and get it."
And then we did like every gig after that.
Which part of life do we find the truth? Is it the beginning, the middle, or the end? Or is it all quasi-truth?
I approach everything in my life with a punk rock attitude. In fact, punk rock means exemplary manners to your fellow human being.
I have a record program on the World Service. I just play records for half an hour. When I asked how many people are listening to the slot, they flicked through a book. They said 40 million. I said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "No, 40 million." Just brings the idea of the globe sharply into focus. Maybe that opened my eyes to hearing things that aren't in the complete Western music groove. I've always kept that going, finding strange records and trying to learn from them. So it's not to keep it too narrow, because if you keep it very narrow, it's going to kill the life in the music.
Summertime sun.
I saw Joe play it with the Mescaleros quite a bit. I remember it being just blissful. There wasn't anywhere else on the planet I could conceivably want to be.
Tokyo, typhoon coming in the city of sand.
I love you.
I think he knew he had something else to do, and he hadn't found it. And then with the Mescaleros, he found what he wanted to do again. I think it was as important to him as the Clash.
I don't have any message except don't forget you're alive, because sometimes when you walk around the city or when you yourself are in a bad mood, you can think, hey, wait a minute, we're alive, you know, we don't know what the next second will bring.
We all thought it might be we play at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or something, you know, we get back together. But it wasn't to be that, it was something more appropriate in a way.
The 2002 strike, we felt we deserved more money. And we didn't think we was being greedy, we was actually going for the average wage of that particular sector. We wasn't seeming to get our message across. Joe realised that there was more to our cause than what the papers and the government were saying. For Joe to come out and do such a gig for us was a great morale booster.
Intend to play. Joe and I had never discussed it beforehand, and we didn't pre-arrange anything. It was just I felt completely compelled. I said, hold me coat, I'm going up.
That was actually the first time that Mick and Joe had appeared on stage together since the breakup of the Clash. It was just kind of cool because they did it for the firemen and not because somebody paid them £2 million.
And that's the end of the first series of Joe Strummer's London Calling. And if you want a second series, please write in. In fact, I'm not even going to wait for you to write in. I'm going to kick off the second series right now. Let it roll with Nina Simone.
Kind of light it's never shone on me. I want my whole life to be.
He did this incredible Christmas card. They were a series of islands with campfires on them and people heading towards them, drawn by the campfires in little boats.
And it was his vision of heaven, I think, this place where people joined and were together.
It was all done very last minute, as always. I think I posted them on December the 21st. So a lot of people received them the day he died.
He was a genuinely happy man. There was no pressure, so there was just joy in what he was doing. He just went like that, on the sofa, reading The Observer, I think.
He died of a congenital heart defect, which we were all totally unaware that he had. It could have struck him down at any time.
None of those things can really last forever, and I think in a way it's kind of greedy of people to expect it to last forever, because that's people like, that's their fire burning at extra strength for us, you know, and that's kind of a lot to ask of people to burn like that.
Tens of thousands of emails that came in were saying, Joe, thank you. You changed the way that I thought and felt about life.
His mythology is cast in reinforced concrete, and it's probably helping to hold up the Trellick Tower right now.
You know, when you and I carried him into that chapel, it felt like you put a bit of weight on. I think that strat must have been in there. He doesn't. It's like Hemingway said about powers. There's never any end to it, and it's the same with Joe.
And so now I'd like to say, people can change anything they want to. And that means everything in the world.
People are running about following their little tracks. I am one of them. But we've all got to stop just following our own little mouse trail. People can do anything. This is something that I'm beginning to learn. People are out there doing bad things to each other. It's because they're being dehumanized. It's time to take the humanity back into the center of the ring and follow that for a time. Greed, it ain't going anywhere. They should have that in a big billboard across Times Square. Without people, you're nothing. That's my spiel.
Once I got to the mountaintop, tell you what I could see. Prairie full of souls running from the priests of iniquity. Where the hell was Elijah? And what do you do? The prophecy came was through. We gotta take the walls of Jericho. Put your lips together and blow to the very top. Say the truth, crystallize it like jewels in the rock. In the rock. Get down, Moses. Falling on the sea, carving on the tablet of LSD. Get down, Moses. I'm in Tennessee. Get down, Moses. Down in the street, blood is rushing down on the gravel to a beat. Get down, Moses. Down in the pit. Lying in a dream, across the battlefield, crashing on a downtown strip. Looking in the eyes of the diamonds and the spies in the hip. Who's sponsoring the crack ghetto? Who's lecturing? Who's in the know and in the don't know? We better take the walls of Jericho. Put your lips together and blow. Going to the very top, where the truth crystallizes like jewels in the rock. In the rock. From the eagle's eye, you gotta make a new friend out of old enemies. Back in Tennessee. Down in the drift, got a lot of reasoning in a dreadhead. Down in the street. We need to eat, we gotta chew it over with our wisdom teeth.
Chuffing.